If you have around £100,000 to spend on a sports car, you're spoiled for choice. Porsche 911, AMG GT, perhaps even a Nissan GTR. But what if you're after something a bit less common, something a little more left field? Today, we've got two options. From Austria, the KTM XBow, a stripped-back, no-nonsense track toy. And from Dubai, the Jannarelly Design-1. A new car with an old soul, promising to deliver some of the style and driving sensation of the world's greatest classic cars. Time to find out how they compare.
I think I'm going to slow down a minute if you're going to hear anything I've got to say. Unless you're a motorbike fan, you probably won't know much about KTM, but they've been building bikes since the early 1950s. They were founded back in 1953 by two Austrians, Ernst Kronrief and Hans Truckenpolz, in the town of Mattinghofen, with huge apologies for my pronunciations, but at least now you know where the letters K and T and M come from. Initially, they specialised in off-road bikes, trials bikes, scramblers, before moving on to road bikes in the early 1990s. Quite why they went into car production in 2008, I've got no idea. I've got no idea what they called their car a crossbow. Well, I think that bloke William Tell, with his apple-splitting trick, was a bit of a hero around their parts a few hundred years ago. So, why not?
So here we are, the Jannarelly Design-1. It's a throwback to how classic cars used to be back in the 60s. And there's been a bit of a retro renaissance at the moment, with manufacturers like Jaguar and Aston Martin building continuation models of their old cars. And you've also got resto modders coming through like Alphaholics, Singer and Theon Design, a car that Tiff drove only a few weeks ago. With those cars, they either reproduce or recreate existing classics. But with this, the Jannarelly, they've taken the essence of these 1960s cars and built them into the car that you see before you now. It's the brainchild of two Frenchmen from Dubai. Anthony Jannarelly is a designer, and he's responsible for the W Motors Lycan and the Fennia Supersport. And he's joined forces with Frederic Julio. And he's a custom boat manufacturer and an expert in composite materials. And they wanted to build something that could provide the driving thrills of a Caterham 7 or a Donkavort, but they wanted a mid-engine and they wanted a bit more practicality. They wanted some boot space as well, which neither of those cars give you.
0 to 62 in 4.1 seconds, top speed of 144 miles an hour. It's a bit of a mad thing. When I first got to hear it, I thought it would come with a wildly revving motorbike engine, a pump-action bike gearbox. But instead we got this outlandish-looking two-seater with a rather tame 2-litre turbocharged Audi power plant. Mind you, there was no room for them. Its first car's not even a screen. I guess it was very much a biker sort of car. While it may only have just 300 horsepower, with its carbon fibre monocoque construction, it weighs in at just over 800 kilograms. So it's got the same sort of power to weight ratio as your average 600 horsepower supercar.
0 to 62, 3.9 seconds, top speed 135, roof off like this feels like 250 miles an hour. It's not about top speed, it's about driver sensation, driver's fun, and that noise tops it all off. It's the icing on the cake. This engine is a naturally aspirated 3.5 litre V6, which is mid-mounted. So the power's right over the rear wheels. It produces 325 horsepower, which I suppose in today's terms doesn't sound that much when you have little hot hatches that come off the production line with that much power. But the Jannarelly is really light. It weighs about 850 kilograms, depending on how much carbon fibre you choose to spec it with, which gives it a power to weight ratio about the same as a new Porsche 911 Turbo S. It's got a throaty, old school sort of soundtrack. And that's partly because you've got this big air intake just over my left shoulder, and partly, of course, because there's a naturally aspirated engine. It sounds absolutely brilliant.
This crossbow is owned by the Barnsley-based Dark Side Developments Company, more famous for their diesel engine tuning exploits. They've just become an importer for KTM. I've actually played with this car a little bit. They've remet the engine to produce about 330 horsepower. They've added a few of KTM's power parts extras that include a Drexler limited slip differential, a short linkage gear shift, and sports WP suspension, which is fully adjustable. And if I knew how to adjust it, I'd probably get out and soften it up a bit for the road, because it's pretty firm. But it's such a direct car, but there's no power steering, no power brakes, no ABS, no traction control. It's like being in a single-seater racing car.
This 6-speed manual gearbox makes such a lovely change. It's funny how it's done full circle, and now it just offers something that modern cars don't. Modern cars are criticised so much for being too sterile, too good, and taking the enjoyment and the fun out of driving. It just puts a big smile on your face. And with this gearbox, you get this quite cool exposed linkage down here as well. Now you can have a sequential gearbox as an optional extra on this car, but you know what? I wouldn't get it for 2 reasons. First reason, it's lovely to be changing gears and be involved and be part of the driving experience of the car. And the second reason, it costs £30,000 as an optional extra. 30% of the cost of the car for flappy paddles. Forget it, give me this manual gearbox any day of the week.
If you're someone that likes knobs, dials and switches, you might be a bit disappointed in the crossbow. I've just got one digital screen with trips and revs and speed, little windscreen wipers and a centre console and a fan and a heater. Otherwise everything's on the steering wheel, a bit like a Formula 1 car I suppose. Indicators like a Ferrari, horn, flasher, some modes to change that digital display, and then just the headlamps and spot lamps. There are very few creature comforts, which is probably a biker's way of building a car. The seats don't move at all, they're very upright. You move the pedals backwards and forwards to suit different sizes of drivers. There's no luggage space anywhere, there's no glove box. The crossbow is as minimalistic as you can possibly get.
It's quite snug inside the car. It suits me quite well, but you've got just some very plain dials, analog dials, and not really much else going on. No big infotainment screens in here. In fact, if you want to buy a radio, it costs you £2,000 extra, and that's hidden under the dashboard. So it's all very plain, leaving you just to focus on your 3 dials and the road ahead. You don't get those driver's aids that we've all become so familiar with modern cars. There's no servo on the brakes, there's no ABS, no traction control, no power steering. You can in fact get traction control as an optional extra, but that's pretty much it. And this car doesn't have it. The steering's very precise. If you push it around a corner, there's not even a hint of understeer. It just gives you such a raw driving experience, which is, in my book, such a nice thing in this modern world that we live in. I like the fact that modern cars are so good, but you don't get that sense of speed or that involvement. This is just you and the car. It really is very special.
I'm too old for this, Tiff. The joys of open-top motoring.
Bit of fun, wasn't it?
I got a wheezing, whistling turbocharger on my ears, and you?
Oh, I got a lovely V6.
Not
very
sure how to
good
get
sound.
out. I've forgotten where the catch was. Ah!
Quite a funky look, the KTM. Hasn't changed much in about 12 years, I think.
And I have to be careful not to tread on my floor here. It's a sort of, well, when it comes to styling, it's a bit of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, really. It's a quirky looking device, the KTM.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a bit more classic with the Jannarelly.
Don't you think it looks a bit like an AC Cobra as well? It's got that sort of stance.
Yeah.
Lots of 60s styling here.
I thought this was a Dubai car.
Yeah, but the
Why has it got a French number plate?
the sales office is based in France, hence why it's got a French number plate.
They're definitely a very, very, very different machines. As you say, sort of classic 60s look, and mine's some Batmobile out of the future.
Oh look, no spoiler or aero on this at the back, and you've got this whopping great big rear wing.
That's what you need, Paul. Downforce, that's what you want.
It does look very good. I like all the exposed parts on the car.
Right, my turn, the Jannarelly. Off you go.
How do you get in this thing?
Oh, it's a bit windier in here. Oh, I'm staying in my hair now. I feel like I'm sitting on top of this car more than in it, like I did with the Crossbow. Flip down again. Oh, I love the engine. So now we've got a completely different engine enjoyment from that whistling turbo. I've now got revs. Lots of revs. The throttle pedal is really sensitive compared with the KTM. You just touch it. I'm not even touching the pedal now. Touch the pedal and whee! It's a lighter car to drive. It's quite sort of frisky feeling. Nice pedal layout. I can heel and toe well. Bring it through the corner. Not quite as stiff as the Crossbow, it moves around a bit more across the road.
Although these two cars are so similar on paper, they could be further apart in terms of how they drive and how they feel. This is like a go-kart that's been down the gym, and it's much noisier, a completely different kind of noise. And this screen, this whole cocoon, it makes it feel almost like one of the modern Indy cars, like you've got a halo around you. It's not the prettiest, but it's effective.
The other thing you suddenly realise is that your left elbow can't go up and down, so it's a sort of a cruising driving style. It's sort of comfy, but it just feels a bit in the way initially. I think the difference is, well, the Crossbow seems to encourage you to drive faster and corner faster. This Jannarelly, apart from a burst of acceleration to hear the revs, I actually want to sit with my left elbow in there, look around a bit, cruise the countryside. Yeah, I'm in a Jannarelly. No, not a Jannarelly, a Jannarelly. Ciao, baby, ciao, Jannarelly. That's what it makes me do, relax. Whereas the Crossbow, I'll be able to
It's got some serious poke as well. The gearbox feels just a little bit better. I love this type ratio. I love the position of the gearbox as well. And this steering wheel is just so good. Feels like a little racing car. It doesn't soak up the bumps as well as the Jannarelly, but I guess you would expect that because this is much more hardcore. This is much more of a racing car, and that Jannarelly is a bit more of a gentleman's cruiser. It's funny because even though you've got this windscreen all the way around you, you do feel much more out there with the elements than you do with the Jannarelly, and I don't know why, because you're actually more cocooned in this car. It's probably because you can just see all the lumps and bumps and springs and coils that are moving all over the place.
I think the Crossbow, I'd probably, think more of going on a track day in than the Jannarelly. I think this I would generally be cruising around. They really are very different experiences. The turbo sound to the normally aspirated sound, steering weight, the driving position, but they're both just hysterical fun.
Tiff, how are you getting on in that Jannarelly?
I'm enjoying the revs, the noise, and I'm quite enjoying cruising along these country roads. But I tell you what, Silverstone's just up the road, so I actually quite fancy getting back in that Crossbow and doing a few laps if I can.
You're out of luck because Silverstone's closed today, so I'll stay in the Crossbow, you stay in the Jannarelly.
I think I'll go back to base, put the roof back on, and hope it rains.